Welcome to Everyday Elephants. I'm your host, Tanner Olson, and in a minute, I'll be joined by Phil, Katie, and Ted. Everyday Elephants is a podcast that discusses what the world is discussing. We take a close look at the elephants in the room, everything from politics to trends to religion. Together, we look for where hope is in the midst of the change and chaos and confusion. Welcome to Everyday Elephants.
Hey, happy birthday, Ted.
Happy birthday,
Yes.
Ted.
Thanks, guys.
The
Forgot my
big
party hat.
choo-choo.
Sign.
That's right, yeah. I'm feeling 22.
Dude, you forgot to sign the contract that, being a part of this show to take off on your birthday. So sorry that you're working
I know,
a day
I'm
like today, man.
fairly disappointed. I'd like for you to double my pay for today's episode.
Easy,
Well-
done. Well, I'm actually going to double everyone's pay for this episode. I think that'd
Yes.
be pretty easy.
Happy birthday to everybody.
There
Thanks
you
for
check will
go.
be
having
in
your
the
birthday, Ted.
Ted, you're like the oldest person in this podcast. So, can you give us some wisdom, man, of what it's like to, I don't know, be a man who's 36 years old?
Listen, as I grew up in the late 1900s, and in a time before the internet, I can tell you things that are vastly underutilized to this day is the squares game. I don't know if your parents would play the squares game with you.
What's
Where-
the squares game?
See, exactly.
Yeah, I have no idea.
If we would get bored, if there was a
How
piece of
old are
paper
you?
close by, late 1900s, Tanner, my dad would grab a sheet of paper and he'd draw a bunch of dots in rows, and basically everyone
Oh, the
got a
square
turn. You
game.
drew a line, and you
Yeah, the
closed
square
off
game.
squares, and whoever had the most squares by the end of the game won. And
I would
think
do that in school all the time.
That
See?
was fifth
Exactly.
grade. That was all of fifth grade for me.
vastly underutilized. Vastly
Great game.
underutilized.
I'm
Great
pretty
game.
sure we did that in a seminary class, Ted.
Oh, 100%. Because
Oh,
we
yeah.
grew up in the late 1900s.
Is that all you did in seminary, guys? Is the
That's
square game?
exactly all we did in
We
seminary.
won't go there.
Listen,
We won't go there. So, well, dude, happy birthday. That's awesome.
Thanks.
How's everyone's week? How you guys been?
great. I mean, just moving the week along. It's only Monday, so
You
trying to
should
get through
say that with
Friday.
more enthusiasm. It's only Monday. We've got a
you're
whole
not, you're
week ahead.
not a teacher. You're not a teacher. So a week in teacher life is like a month.
Whoa. In some ways, I like to think that I am a teacher, but in most ways, I am certainly not.
Yeah.
Can I tell you what we? Can I tell you guys what we did last night? This is going
Go
to
for
come
it.
off as bragging, but I left the house after 6 o'clock on a Sunday night.
Whoa.
We went downtown Nashville,
Whoa.
which is about 5 minutes away for us. We went to a Christmas vacation themed bar at night on a Sunday. And what? I don't remember. I was too tired I wasn't paying attention. But it was fun. It was different, but it was cool. It was like all, Christmas vacation themed. I sat by the cat who had the Christmas lights in its mouth. It was fun. It was something different.
Two things on that, Tanner. One,
Yeah.
when you said we left the house to go downtown on a Sunday night,
Mhm.
I already fell
Yeah.
asleep.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, sorry. I drank
and-
coffee at 4:30. So
Second, I understand the idea of Christmas Vacation. I've never seen the movie. So, yeah.
Well, that's and that's interesting. So I think that's something that should probably change this year. It's
Probably
a
I'm
great
really
movie.
proud of
but-
you, though. I'm really proud of you. Just
Thank
to
you.
make it
Yeah.
out that late. That's
Yeah.
a big step in your life.
Because Phil, you're an extrovert. You'll go out anytime. Like you start most things after 10 o'clock. And I'm usually in bed by 10. And to be
Oh,
honest,
dude,
I
we
was
just-
in bed by 10 last night too. So
We just flew back to Nashville last night with our boys. I think we got in around 9 p.m. So, and then we had a friend staying here, and we talked to her till 2 a.m. So shout out Jen Hine for keeping me up all night, because that's how the Klopkes roll. Let's go.
And I just said that. I said every time I go to the Klopke house, I have to prepare to stay up till 2 a.m. and have really deep conversations. And I think the last time I was there, I was just getting off of COVID and it didn't go so well. I was talking in circles and I then had to apologize for what I said because it was just horrible. But yes, deep conversations at the Klopke house till 2. Mm-hmm. That's
But
a
I'm
given.
pretty sure when I turn 36 real soon, like Ted, it's all downhill from here. So
Listen, I
Yeah.
already fell asleep early at the Klopke house for many years.
You
Um,
also would fall asleep talking to me in mid sentence on my
oh,
couch
yeah.
and then just start snoring. Like I
No
used to have
problem.
video footage of this, and I wish I reveal it to our audience out there. But you have
I'm
an
not
impressive
ashamed.
superpower, man. It's
I'm not
there's
ashamed.
no one like you, Ted.
Hey, that's true.
That's a
One of a
compliment.
kind.
That is a compliment of all compliments. Well, let's get into this week's episode, shall we?
Let's do it.
We
All right.
shall.
Last week we were a little all over the place. So instead of having 3 topics to talk about, we're going to stick with just 2. This week on the podcast, we're talking about the mouse and the Musk, the greatest place on earth in the wild west of the internet, endless characters and 280 characters. We're talking about Disney and Twitter. Phil, you sent over a headline about Disney. What do you got for us?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Disney just released a new animation film, I think Strange New World, and it was a bust. I
Strange
believe that
Worlds.
Strange World. Thank you, Strange New World.
Mm-hmm.
It was a bust. I think they budgeted
No, the
somewhere
movie is
between
called
100.
Strange World, not Strange New
Strange New
World.
Worlds is Star Trek.
You know what? I didn't know that, but thank you for correcting me. Strange World. There we go. Thanks
And a
for.
whole new world, that's Aladdin. So, yeah.
And I might start breaking out in song. Anyways, they budgeted over 135 to 190 million dollars on this particular project, and it's reported that they probably will be losing over $100 million on this particular movie, which is actually I think the one of the worst showings for an animated film since Winnie the Pooh. They made 30 million. I mean, they made around $30 million, but they also had a much smaller budget. So to put that in perspective, Disney has been struggling per se, and there was another film that just was released. Hopefully, I'll get this one right. The Rise of Gru just released this summer from Illumination, and they grossed over 369 million. So, capitalism at its finest. Disney is struggling where Disney once was one of the leaders of all times, and I think this has gone way back even before these films. Um, I think it was earlier in the year. We were in a text thread about this, and we were talking about when the leaked video came out for Disney. And what happened was some of the Disney execs were talking about how they were going to change the narrative of how they're going to release their animation films and make sure it was more inclusive, all things LGBTQ, all things also biracial, like making sure that those things are um, being shown and demonstrated in their films. And that has resulted into some flatline showings. I think this summer it was Lightyear that released. That was the spinoff from Toy Story, which also was not a great showing whatsoever. So, to you all, um, this is the elephant in the room. What do you guys make of what's happening with Disney right now?
Yeah, well, my first thoughts on this, it's more of a question, is if our social narrative is so loud around inclusion, right? And there seems to be such a heavy push with critical theory and with just inclusion. Even in schools right now, we're seeing this theme, right? Especially in my county, and I think every county really, but we're seeing this push and for diversity and to hear everybody and equality and equity and all these terms, right? If that's such a loud social narrative, then why the results that we're getting when it comes to this Disney film, or just in general, these Disney films that are promoting these things that seem to be what everybody looks like loud on board, all of a sudden we're seeing different results when it comes down to the wire. When it is presented, it seems like people aren't responding to it. That's my question: is why is that? Is it really, do people really believe in this as much as they say they do? Is culture really on board as much as the social narrative is saying that everyone's on board, if that makes sense? So what do you guys think about that?
I, I'm not sure if it's 100%. I don't think the assumption is wrong to say as they've changed, and like Phil said, that leaked audio probably is cutting into some of the idea here. I would wonder if it's not just if there's more to it. that as you look and you say, um, there's more and more things that are coming out on streaming. Is it just the social commentary, or is it the social commentary plus, right? To say maybe I think there is part of that. I really do, but I don't know if that's the huge thing. And I know, Phil, as you and I have kind of talked about this over the last couple of weeks, there was a big marketing budget, but I still feel like I didn't see much about it. And maybe that's just I'm not watching where they're marketing. That might be the problem. Um,
I believe there was a
but
big marketing budget, but then when they were testing out the movie, it wasn't really connecting with the audience. So they did cut back on some of the marketing money. And the other thing
mhm,
to keep in mind, because probably some of these films are so provocative, especially for other cultures, let's say in Asia, the
yeah,
Middle East, and Russia, these films are no longer being released there, where there is probably a huge market that Disney's not capitalizing on as well.
right, right.
Do you also think that, I mean, Disney's so big and has been around for a while, and I don't think they're going to go anywhere, even if one film or a couple of films don't make as much as they cost. Like, is there just something like we're going to keep releasing content, we're going to keep releasing movies, and we're not going to zone in. We're going to zone in on this audience and this audience and this audience, knowing that hey, maybe this audience isn't going to make as much, but we're also going to give them something that they can connect with, which is kind of something maybe that we see in Strange World or in the Buzz Lightyear movie, where it may not connect with everybody, but it's going to connect with a certain percentage of their audience, and they want to honor, see, and reflect them. You know what I'm saying? And so is it like they're just creating because that's what they do?
I mean, it could be. I mean, Disney's always known for, pushing the culture barriers and where, I mean, this is not the first time that we've heard people protesting against Disney. It's been happening for a long period of time. I mean, even when I was a kid, maybe you guys remember this too, you'd hear parents of our friends groups saying, we're not going to Disney World because of this and because this came out in this movie. So this is not new. However, I do believe that it's probably gotten out of control to the fact that now more people are, you know, even more so against Disney than ever before. But however, Disney is such a big thing, as Ted, you brought up earlier when we were talking about this in the pre-show, is that, Marvel Universe, it's doing pretty good right now. And Black Panther made a ton of money. So maybe they're going to still push this out and keep on going with this, even if they're not making money with some of these animated films.
Well, and didn't they just change CEOs again? They went back to the guy who had led them through. I don't know the full story, because the world is full of stories and it's hard to keep up. And we'll talk more about that. But they did just switch CEOs, correct?
Yeah, they went back to the guy
Back
who
to
was leading
Bob
before
Iger.
COVID, and
Yeah.
yeah, and I wonder if part of it too is that everyone's kind of still getting their footing after what was kind of a globe changing event in 2020. But Katie, I'd like to hear more about you as a teacher, and you mentioned critical
Hmm.
theory and social constructs and things like that, and how
Hmm.
you might be seeing that. You see something like this Disney movie, but are you seeing those things being pushed more towards you? Are you in public school? Are you teaching in a public school?
Yes, I am. Hmm.
So do you see that happening more? I mean, you're in Florida, which home of
Home of
House
the
of the
Free,
Mouse, if
baby.
you will. So I mean, what are you seeing?
Yeah, well, personally, I mean, there's always this. I mean, we do have trainings on inclusion, and you have trainings on how to have these discussions with students, and it is along the lines where it's such a borderline where when you have a student, and now I don't personally have students, but I've heard other teachers in other schools or stories where you'll have students that want to be identified, not even as a gender, but as a cat or a dog, or and teaching pronouns is part of the curriculum, and so because we have to learn sentences and semantics and sentence structure, and so but there's a lot of gray area where there wasn't didn't used to be a lot of gray area. Now those conversations, I have not had to encounter those, but of course, implicitly in our training, you're going to see a lot of critical theory. You're going to see a lot of, when it comes to social discipline, social behavior, social emotional skills, simple things that even as parents, you want to teach your students or your kids, good social skills, right? You're going to see this idea of, somebody is an oppressor and somebody is a victim constantly, and that's going to be the social construct. Instead of individualism, it's going to be a kind of a socialistic, take on it. And that's kind of where this agenda comes from. Now, when you have these Disney movies like this, right? This is definitely something that, my students might go see. And my students might come back and have these, and they haven't yet, but they might have questions or even say things. And as a teacher, we're not encouraged to really press in or have these conversations by any means, but definitely not to discourage students if they were to talk about LGBTQ topics or gender fluidity or anything like that. So there with the public school right now, it is starting to lean a lot towards that same social construct of inclusion that we're seeing Disney follow. So it does make it difficult when okay, I'm a Christian teacher, right? So that changes things because my beliefs are different. I do have a different stance, and I'm also, my citizenship is first in heaven, right? And then I have a citizenship here on earth in America, and I have a job to do. But first and foremost, my citizenship is in heaven. So what I get to share with my students on a day-to-day basis, where I don't have to explicitly talk to 5-year-olds about sexuality, because I think it's inappropriate in both spectrums, whether I just think sexuality at a young age, it's developmentally not appropriate. So especially when they get in, Disney is producing a movie like this, I'm going to take a stance on it. I'm going to say that's developmentally not appropriate for students. And that can go both ways. I mean, I even watched a Disney movie that I thought was going to be innocent with my husband, and it was not even same sex. It had nothing to do with same sex. It was just a natural relationship. And I thought this is inappropriate for developmentally for, I believe students at that age, at 5 or 6 years old, when you're watching an animated movie, you should be learning about friendship, relationships, and significant others, as far as it goes with parent and child relationships and adult and children relationships. That is, at that age developmentally, your significant other in psychology, your attachment is with an adult. And so, and to have healthy relationships before considering your sexuality at all, and then to push a message about sexuality on students or kids that it's not developmentally appropriate anyways. To me, it seems, whether it goes one way or the other, it seems indoctrinating. And that's just going to be my stance on it. And so,
well,
go ahead.
It's as you say that, I think that's fascinating.
That was a lot.
Because I think of who I was in, especially like late high school, early college, and how much that was influenced by, the one that pops out to me is like High School Musical, right? That was, High School Musical came out, I was in high school, and it was a big deal. But the whole idea, the thing that Disney realized it could buy into was, I'd label it a new American dream, which this was more Disney Channel oriented, but it was the teen romance. And it was, everything's going to be this romantic thing. And it's idolization. It's looking and saying, for me to be fulfilled, for me to find hope, for me to find life, for me to find enjoyment, I need that relationship in my life. Now, we as Christians would counter back and say, well, hey, that's a great relationship to have. But also Paul says, listen, some people are going to be blessed to be single. And I think that's actually infiltrated the church in some unhealthy ways of how we handle singleness and how we connect around relationship and those kinds of things. but also I remember the beauty of being this like love crazed kid in middle and high school, or in middle through like college. And there was this point in college where it was like no one, like, just I had never had a girlfriend, it had never happened, and here I was, woe is me. And it was kind of this moment where that switch flipped, and I'll give it like power of the Holy Spirit. And that was some incredible time in my life, because all of a sudden I wasn't worried who I was sitting next to. I wasn't worried, what's that person doing? What's that girl looking at? It was just like the freedom of just having fun. And I think some of what we have done with the romantic ideas, and a lot of it comes from that place with Disney, is it becomes this burden of saying, you've got to have this figured out. And I've actually really enjoyed some of the newer, like recent Disney stuff that maybe it has romance in it, but it's like second level. Or like Moana and Kanto, even Frozen to a level is, that there is romance there, but it's not the main storyline. It's not the main plot point. But it seems like, Disney has figured out they have formulas. How do we make money? Yep. And that's what's interesting too in this, is they've got a formula of how do we make money. And this movie, Strange Worlds comes along and they didn't make money on it.
This was supposed to be one of their biggest movies because they released it during Thanksgiving time, which historically, if you want to make money as a company, it's summer and Christmas, right? And they're in a different spot right now. I want to go back to some of the things that Katie was saying, and I'm thinking about this in terms of our development, right? Just recently, I got to go with some of my neighbors to a show here in East Nashville for adults only. It's called Drunken Disney, all right? It's basically singing Disney songs the whole time and drinks at a bar nearby. And it was so much fun, And I'm singing all these songs and we're having a good time. And I realized like these songs were my childhood. Like everything came from Disney, and I was like just some great memories. And only to think like that was very formational in my life, and it will probably be very formational towards my son's life too. And so it really does make me pause and think in terms of the things that they're consuming. And believe me, it goes beyond Disney. Like I realize like I'm putting stuff on the TV for my son, and somebody's saying he's watching. I'm like, oh man, I need to do a better job observing what he's actually consuming, because it's so crazy how much he's taking all these things and this information, and he's applying it to his own life. And I need to be careful as a parent. And I think there's there's a lot of parents out there that are also responding the same way. It's like, this may not be best for my family.
Well, and I guess that's the question I would ask too, is like, sometimes I think we as Christians ask the wrong question, which is, why would Disney do this to us? When really, I think the answer sometimes is saying, hey, we as parents, like we make decisions of what our kids are going to consume, and that means we have to be more involved. Yep. Hopefully one day to be a parent, that's something I've thought about, is like, hey, like this is, and you just mentioned it, Phil, like you got to watch and dive into what is going on, because I don't think we can take and put, as we talk about inclusion, as we talk about representation, as we talk about all those things, I don't think we can take and say, hey, we're going to hold up the church's standards to a Disney movie. If Disney's going to make that whatever decision they want to make, that's their decision. They are not. Totally. They're in no way a church organization.
Right. And I was going to add to that too. Like Disney doesn't owe us anything. They don't. Right. They've never declared. It's almost our stock in it. Like we have to think critically and decide what boundary we're going to take, and whether we want to take stances and change Disney, whether or not it changes or not, that's not our control. But we can control what happens in our family and what happens in our life. Sorry, Ted, I didn't mean to cut you off, but
no, that was yeah.
The thought
And I think part of it too, though, that I struggle with is like, I want inclusion, I want representation. I don't want a lot of times we look at the social issue, um, and we don't always go to the empathetic level as well to say,
Mm-hmm.
even
Hmm.
if I disagree, what does it feel like to not have that representation? It doesn't mean I have to buy into every social construct or social theory out there, but can I empathize and say, you know, what would that feel like? I may not know, but how do I learn? How do I grow? Um, and how do I not? I don't know. How do I live both in and outside of the world? Like you said, Katie,
Yeah.
to say I'm here, but I'm looking towards the kingdom. But how do I
Hmm.
live here? You think of Jeremiah 29, and a lot of times we quote 29:11.
Yep.
I have a plan for you, but we forget what comes in there as well, which is, pray for
Hmm.
the benefit of your city, because if your city prospers, you prosper.
Mm-hmm.
And
Hmm.
so, and that's Babylon. Like that's, that he's talking about, people in foreign lands. Like this was not Israel.
Hmm.
This was, you are in a foreign land. So how do you pray for your foreign land to prosper? A land that is not going to follow God, that's
Mm-hmm.
not going to be doing anything following those ways. And he doesn't say pray for them to be more like you. He says pray for your city to prosper. And I wonder sometimes, how do we look at things like this and say, how do I pray for prosperity and not just my own feelings, so that I don't have to deal with it? Because I think that's what happens sometimes. We go, Disney, you shouldn't do this because I don't want to deal with that.
Yeah.
Right.
As opposed to
Right.
saying, you're going to do what you're going to do. How do I do the hard work of figuring it out?
And I think sometimes we don't like dualism, when it's dualistic in the sense of I cannot stand for something in one area, but still be compassionate to representation, right? Um, and I'm not, there's certain things that I'm just not good. That's a boundary, that's a belief, that's a conviction, right? But I'm not going to let that be labeled as exclusive, or in the sense of that representation doesn't matter, because it does.
Yep.
And people matter, right? But we have to be able to, as believers, be able to sit in this dualistic mindset of like having compassion for lost people, having compassion for people that really truly are oppressed, but then also be able to discern, like a double-edged sword, okay, what's the difference between oppression and what's the agenda behind the social construct or narrative behind what's being fed to me? Because just because, and I think, Phil, I know you sent this article, but um, just because all those areas in the movie Strange World were represented, but now there was really no diversity, because at the end of the day, you had um, almost every character was so gender fluid,
Mm-hmm.
so that now there was no direct boundary being represented. It was just a free for all, in the sense that now there was no definition of anybody being represented, where I couldn't tell, like from what the article said. I didn't see the movie, but who was female, who was male, who was part of family, who was in charge, who was, there was no order, in the sense that now nobody was being represented, because we're trying so hard to push this narrative that now we're losing senses of boundaries. We're losing a good description of people and identity for the search for identity. Now we're losing the very thing that we're kind of aiming for. And I think that we have to be careful of that and sit in this dualistic thinking that I can still be compassionate, and still not want my 5-year-old to be exposed to sexuality in general, but I want that to be represented maybe in a different light, in a different way, somewhere else, but not for my 5-year-old, and
Yeah.
not for, because even science tells us that that's not true and not good information for a little kid. So, now, like, I think that's kind of where I sit too. And I don't want to be, nobody wants to be called a bigot, or say, oh, I don't want to be that person that's not tolerant or not inclusive because I think that way. No, I want truth. I want there to be some kind of boundary and some kind of description around that. But Phil, what are your thoughts?
No, it's a good point. Like I don't necessarily want to shelter or hide my boys from the world. Like, we are a family that wants to be around all people, whether it's sexual orientation, family members, friends, whatever that might be, different cultural backgrounds. All that stuff is important for us as a family, especially as Christians. We look at ourselves as missionaries in the city and the neighborhood that we live in, and that's going to be um, being in other people's homes and inviting them to our tables and breaking bread with them, and that is different than also just having them consume what is being pushed out in terms of culture, in terms of the media, in terms of the movies that are out there. Um, I think it's important that some of these elements and these things should be talked about in the home, and and I just need to be mindful of that as a parent. So it's it's getting trickier. I'm also wondering what's Disney's next move, right? They didn't make a lot of money, and money does speak volumes. We've talked about this in the podcast before. So, are they going to continue to make sure they're pushing this type of narrative, or are they going to say, "Hey, listen, we gotta draw it back a little bit"? So, um, it's interesting for sure.
Well, they
Yeah,
just raised their
100%.
prices to Disney World, so I think that's kind of one of the ways that they're going to start making back their money, just a
Boom,
little
Problem
bit.
problem
solved.
solved.
There it
Problem
Yep,
is.
solved.
There we
yep.
go.
We've talked a lot about boundaries, we've talked a lot about media. So let's maybe move on to a place where there maybe are no boundaries and there's a lot of media. Maybe we could talk about Twitter for a little bit. A lot of stuff has been going on there, more stuff than I can even put into words. And so I'm going to stay silent on this one again. What's happening? Just kidding.
It's hard to keep up, right?
What's going
And
on?
also,
There's so much that's going on. It is just like I don't even know how, like, where to begin, because there's a couple of things that we want to talk about. I mean, there's been, like, Twitter leaks about the Hunter Biden stuff. I'm going to say his name, Kanye. He's always in the news right now. There's a lot
yep.
that's just been happening.
We
And
didn't
I
we
don't know
didn't even
about
put
y'all.
down Balenciaga and what's going on with
Yeah,
that whole
and
thing.
I'm sure some people are listening and being like, oh, I didn't hear about that. I didn't hear about that. And honestly, I probably wouldn't have heard about most of these things if it wasn't because of this podcast, right? Like, you guys, like, all week, all weekend, feels like,
True.
did you guys see this? Did you guys see this? Have you guys seen this? I'm like, oh, no, I haven't
Tanner
seen
and
it.
I got an
Oh,
No.
angry text from Phil this morning going, "Are you guys dead?" Because we dared to take a Sunday night to ourselves. Tanner, I was at family birthday dinner,
I
and
was
we
out of the
weren't in the
town.
text
So,
thread, and Phil
Oh,
was wondering.
please.
Yeah.
all right. So,
Tanner
Phil,
was at
catch
Santa's
us.
Village.
Oh, Phil, catch us up on what's happening on Twitter.
Well, I mean, I'm pretty sure we should just rename the show Everyday Elon because Elon Musk is a part of this thing. And so here we are. Elon, I think it was Friday night, just said, "Hey, there's going to be a release 5 p.m. Eastern about all things the Hunter Biden story within Twitter and how the whole thing was handled." And if you're not familiar, Hunter Biden, the leak, it was something that the right put out right before the election of 2020, and I think it was the New York Post that put it on Twitter of the story of Hunter Biden's laptop and what they found, and which leads to so many different things, which I'm probably not going to get into, but you can Google it and find out for yourself. But the big news was Twitter suspended that particular account, the New York Post, and said this is disinformation and we don't believe that it's real. But now we are learning what happened in the back end of how Twitter really handled that particular story in that situation, which ultimately a lot of conservatives are saying that was one of the main reasons why Trump did not win the election, is because of the social media news suppression that was happening. So it was interesting. One of the guy that released the particular story has been known as historically a progressive liberal that has gone after conservatives. And he shared this Twitter thread. I think it was 35 different parts of what Twitter did behind the scenes. And Elon is hinting, because he is Elon and he has all the power in the world, that he is going to be releasing more stories of what has happened with Twitter. So we're learning behind the scenes, behind the curtain of what is happening. Um, my question for you is, what are some of your thoughts so far, guys, in terms of what's been released so far in Elon's world?
Can I tell you one thing that bothers me? And it's about sports. But when you're watching a game, and let's just say it's basketball, some of us watch basketball, and the ball goes out of bounds, and the players point at the other team to say, hey, it was out of bounds on them when it was clearly out on them, and they know that. That's one of those things that like completely frustrates me. Or in baseball, when it's clearly a strike and they're like, what? How could this be? That's your fault. I wish that the internet, and it kind of sounds like there's a little bit of course correction happening where it's like, no, the ball was out on you, and we're going to bring some light on that. It just bothers me when people are like, I'm going to blatantly lie about something that I know to be true and see if we can get the ball back. Right? Does that make sense a little bit?
Is that the same as gaslighting somebody? Is that similar or is it the same?
Yeah.
Because that's what it reminds me of. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or flopping, right? You're taking, the World Cup's happening, right? And, here's, oh, I got touched, but here I go, I'm going to fall on the ground and point at this other guy that he had this deep ill content. But, Tanner, I think that's actually a really good outlook on it, because that's part of the problem we have with politics now is it's become a game. It's we've made it, who's our favorite team and is our favorite team going to win? Yep. And so it's disappointing. Like the stuff that Musk, either he released or, gave access to this guy, whatever it was disappointing. To look into say, it wasn't the White House, which has been kind of one of the misreported or tweeted things, is that, the government technically didn't do this. This was the Democratic National Committee and the Biden campaign, which doesn't make it a whole lot less worse, but it's still a differentiation between, those kinds of things.
Yep.
The problem is Twitter became something more than just, here's my thoughts and it used to be, 140 characters. Mm-hmm. It became our instantaneous news source. You think about sports, right? Where do you find out about trades, about free agent signings? They come from, a lot of times, from Twitter, because all of a sudden the journalist, whoever it is that's breaking the story, has instant access to however many followers they have. And
plus you can break the story immediately too. You
right.
don't have to send it through an editor. It's immediately.
Right.
So we're getting news faster than ever before.
And so Twitter became more than just this site that you can express yourself. It became the number one news source. Like I don't watch the nightly news. Every once in a while I'll get on and like search articles, but most of the time I'm linking off of somewhere else to find my news. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever it is. But I think that what this shows and the question it makes us ask, a lot of the question has been, this is a First Amendment issue. Well, technically, I don't think it is a First Amendment issue. I think it's a question about corporate ethics. To say, Twitter was a company that started as a social media site. And I think that originally this would not be a huge deal of, we know people at Twitter, we're going to call them and ask them to, suppress this story. Like, that's political dealing 101. You use your connections to help your side. The problem is Twitter, Facebook, everything has become something more, and we let the monster get so far out ahead we don't have a good cage for it. And so what I see is really disappointing in this story is the fact of saying Twitter got that response, and then without identifying themselves as a political entity, made political decisions. And they kept making political decisions. And now even Elon Musk, in saying, I'm going to release all this stuff, is doing the human trait, which is we don't find tension in the center, we swing the pendulum the other way.
Yep.
And it's not saying what Hunter Biden did was right, and I think they're probably is, there needs to be some kind of responsibility in digging in on this. But I also think the other side now saying, oh, well, really, there's nothing to this Hunter Biden story. Well, that wasn't true. So it's a weird thing, but I think it has more to do with how are we going to regulate these social media companies and less with this is a First Amendment issue.
Well, but I mean, I know you make a good point that, people are making the case for the First Amendment issue, which it's still a social media platform. You are right, Ted. But when social media has the ability to swing elections, isn't that a problem?
Well, but then let's go back and let's look at Russian bot farms on Facebook that pushed a lot of people towards Trump.
I mean, I think it goes back to what Ted.
Remember, Ted, that was proved in all the hearings that was actually run by the Democrats, though. Like that was something by the Hillary's campaign.
Not all of them.
There. But
not all of them.
No, they set up that story. First of all, please hear me that I know that Republicans and Democrats are all in the wrong in this, but like that was another case right there where they were trying to say this was for 2 years there was investigations with what they did, and then it was proved that was not done.
And
I'm collusion with Trump and Russia.
I'm not talking about even Trump being connected to it. I'm talking about foreign governments using social media. So hear that. I should have specified.
Okay.
I'm more talking about a foreign government can, write my name's Fred Jones and sign up with an email, and now all of a sudden they have access to 150,000 people, Like that's, sorry, should have specified.
Yeah, and I'm also saying, too, this is not about Trump in the election. Like, this is far
I
from
understand what you're saying.
We just want to be able to receive news that, that's not going to swing people's opinions for elections. And granted, like, it goes back to something deeper. Like, this is the kingdom in Jesus we serve is not of this world. But, we're in this world. And it's amazing when it's swaying people's ideologies and beliefs, and I mean these are new religions for people too.
Well, it also goes back to what Ted was saying. It's all a game, and we are being treated as as players or as fans. But it always kind of reminds me, like, we have to sift through all of this noise to find the true news. It kind of feels like a gold rush kind of situation, right? We're just trying to find out what's true, and like every now and again we get the actual information. And I don't know about y'all, but it's frustrating, and it makes me not want to engage with it at all. And it makes me want to just kind of pull back and be like, you know what, like that's not, I don't care. And I do care, but I don't care like about what's happening or going on, because I don't know, maybe it's important, but like, do I have the time or the energy or the heart to wait around long enough for me to be like, oh, that's what happened? Yeah. By the time you get that, you realize, like, is that even true?
Or read all these scholarly reports that are peer reviewed by so many different to be able to receive actual scientific information. Like, you don't have the time for that. Neither do
There's a great clip going around of Bo Burnham, and he's talking. It looks like he's at some tech company, but if you haven't seen
all the time,
well. Bo Burnham, the comedian, but what's great about it is he basically breaks down and says, it used to be, we as people, we colonized land. And now that we've colonized the entire world, all we have left to colonize is your attention. And he has this great breakdown of saying, I don't think social media companies intend to be evil, but I think what they want is every bit of attention you have. They want you glued to your phone at all times. And the way you do that is the story has to be more click-worthy, and so the disappointment for me is there of saying the DNC, Twitter was on their side for a long time, and now that it's not, all of a sudden Twitter's real bad, and it doesn't seem to be that much different than it was, 3 weeks ago.
It's gotten better. Twitter 2.0 coming your way, Ted.
All right. So my final question to kind of close out this episode is, so with all the new age and the wave of Twitter, like, how are we as Christians supposed to respond to the unending headlines. What do we do?
Yeah, my first thought, I think about Peter when he steps off the boat. This is like such a like cheesy illustration if you're in the Christian world, but when Peter stepped off the boat and there was the waves and the storm and the rain and him having to fix his eyes on Jesus, I feel like oftentimes in this world and in this culture, we have got to focus our gaze in the midst of the loud wind, the loud rain, the storm, and focus in on Jesus and his word and his truth and what he is saying. Because, like you were saying, Ted, this can get very distracting, and we can actually make this and this news much bigger than what God is doing in his business, and forget that, because that's not going to make headlines. What God is doing isn't going to be on our Google feed or on our Twitter stream. What he is doing, we have got to fix our eyes on him. And I feel like there's hope in this, because God is doing a lot of very great things and hopeful things in the midst of all of the hurt, all the pain, all the news, everything that's going on. He is moving and he is doing lots of great things. And one of the verses that was just on my heart was in 2 Timothy 2:4. No one serving as a soldier gets entangled in civil affairs, but rather tries to please his commanding officer. Similarly, anyone who competes as an athlete does not receive a victor's crown except by competing according to the rules. And kind of going on to say that our main focus is to please the Father, that our citizenship, that we're on a mission, we're on a goal. There's a fight, but not every news headline is our fight. It's not always our domain, and we're not going to win. We can't seek victory there. We have to seek spiritual victory in what God is doing.
Ditto to what Katie said. Thank you for beautifully stating that, Katie. I love that. Ultimately, these are secondary issues, right? It's good for me as a Christian to be aware of these things and to talk about these things, because I have neighbors and friends that are consumed by these subjects, and I want to be able to have conversations with them and ask better questions and just to be fully aware of what's going on. But this is so secondary to the things that matter the most, and which obviously can distract me at times. But what Katie said, I thought that was great.
The only thing I'd add to what Katie said is I think the body of Christ plays into this, to be like time and relationship with people in Christ with you is always going to be a blessing. We had a thank you dinner for volunteers from our church this Friday night, and it was an incredible high coming off of that for me, of just getting to sit with some of our volunteers and have dinner. And I think for me that's a huge piece, is saying, where are you slowing down and turning off to spend time with people? And my brother, I've been giving him some crap about it, but he's been posting a lot on social media lately. But his big thing is slow down, look around, and I think that's part of it, is slowing down and saying, man, I want to spend time with people. I want to spend time without my phone, without those kinds of things. And kudos to Katie, who is not on the drug of Twitter and is safe from its vile clutches. But I think it's being with people is a big piece of the gift we have.
So what I'm hearing you say is it's good to be out past 6 p.m. hanging out with people.
No. You can hang out with people before 6 p.m., Phil.
People got to work, Ted. People have to work. You can't just be hanging out with people during the workday.
I can. I'm a pastor. I do it all the time.
Exactly. We're not all pastors, Ted.
Well, Phil, maybe you work a little harder than you could be.
That's true.
Oh man, here we go.
Ooh, there's the old wounds. Sorry, Phil. On that note.
All right, well that'll do it. Ooh, all right, well that'll do it for this episode.
I love you, buddy.
I love you too.
Oh, and on a good note. Very nice.
All
Very
right,
nice.
whatever. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Everyday Elephants. Make sure to subscribe to the show and leave a rating and review. Follow us on Facebook and YouTube, but not on Twitter because we're not on Twitter. If you're interested in being a sponsor for the podcast or you have a topic that you would like for us to discuss, send us an email, everydayelephantspod@gmail.com. You can also check the show notes for the links. We love to get mail. All right, we did it. Another episode. Have a great week, and we will catch you next Monday. Peace.